So this article, the DEI industry needs to check its privilege. The worst of the industry is expensive and runs from useless to counterproductive by Connor Friedersdorf. And this is May 31st, 2023. This is when Bridge was also pumping out articles, right? Bridge had been pumping out articles since early 2023 or late 2022, talking about making their inclusion index, talking about making their IMAX fucking giant bubble thing. So Bridge was already working on this knowledge that the industry was not doing enough. The diversity, equity, and inclusion industry exploded in 2020 and 2021, but it is undergoing a reckoning of late. And not just in states controlled by Republicans, where officials are dismantling DEI bureaucracies and public institutions. Corporations are cutting back on DEI spending and personnel. News outlets such as the New York Times and New York Magazine are pushing more articles that cover the industry with skepticism. And DEI practitioners themselves are raising concerns about how their competitors operate. So even as far back as early last year, when basically it was only Bud Light in the limelight for this stuff, they were already trying to push articles about how there is a lot of corporations cutting back on the DEI spending. How many of those corporations actually did that? How many actually did that? Like, we have gone through the past year showing how all of these companies basically have been paying lip service. And now, in the current times, we have people doing the same exact thing, pushing the look at us, we are winning. Ironically, the lolcow farmers are also lolcows. Oh my god. Pushing more articles that cover the industry with skepticism. I already read that part. The scrutiny is overdue. This growing multi-billion-dollar industry was embedded into so many powerful public and private institutions so quickly that due diligence was skipped and costly failures guaranteed. Now and forever, employers should advertise jobs to applicants of all races and ethnicities, afford everyone an equal opportunity to be hired and promoted, manage workplaces free of discrimination, and foster company cultures where everyone is treated with dignity. America should conserve any gains it has made in recent years toward an equal opportunity economy. Perhaps the best of the DEI industry spurred the country in that direction. However, the worst of the DEI industry is expensive and runs from useless to counterproductive. And even people who highly value diversity and inclusion should feel queasy about the DEI gold rush that began in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd. Saint Floyd, infant be his name, has been mentioned. A poor black man's death became a pretext to sell hazily defined consulting services to corporations, as if billions in outlays, mostly among relatively privileged corporate workers, was an apt and equitable response. A radical course correction is warranted, but first, let's reflect on how we got here. On rare occasions, a depraved act captures the attention of a nation so completely that there is a widespread impulse to vow never again, and to act in the hope of making good on that promise. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination prompted the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, triggered a global war against Al-Qaeda, among many other things, including the tenuously connected invasion and occupation of Iraq. Floyd's murder was similarly galvanizing. Are they trying to compare George Floyd to Martin Luther King in September 11th? What? Arresting, trying, and convicting the police officers involved in implementing new police training was the most immediate response. But Floyd's story suggested some additional possibilities. With several criminal convictions in the past, Floyd tried to turn his life around, preaching nonviolence in a neighborhood plagued by gun crime, serving as a mentor to young people, and trying to stay employed. He also struggled with drug addiction, layoffs due to circumstances beyond his control, and money problems that presumably played a role in the counterfeit bill he was trying to pass on the day that he was killed. If a callous police officer was the primary cause of his death, secondary causes were as complex and varied as poverty in America. So how strange, how obscene, in fact, that America's professional class largely reacted to Floyd's murder not by lavishing so much of the resources spent in his name on helping poor people, or the formerly or currently incarcerated, or people with addictions, or the descendants of slaves and sharecroppers, or children of single mothers, or graduates of underfunded high schools, but rather by hiring DEI consultants to gather employees together for training. In what exactly? It is often hard to say. What one has been trained to do after hearing Robin DiAngelo, the best-selling author and social justice educator, lecture on what she calls white fragility, or after pondering a slide deck with cartoons meant to illustrate the difference between equality and equity as critical theorists understand it. Or after absorbing the racial equity consultant Tama Okun's widely circulated claims, attributing including a sense of urgency and beliefs including individualism are traits of white supremacy culture. Okun made those claims in a 1999 article that even she regards as widely misused. She once told an interviewer about the article, "It was not researched, I didn't sit down and deliberate, it just came through me." She has launched a website that explains her views in far more detail and with more nuance. I don't know, because wasn't that also used in that fucking museums bullshit as well? Consider a specific PR pitch from a DEI consultant in 2021 chosen for how typical it is. It leads by invoking Floyd's death as the impetus to take bolder actions. It promises expertise in best practices to corporate leaders. Then it pivots to naming a specific training on offer. And this is pretty much how every single article we read on this stuff begins. Kind of like how the Bible is God speaking through the writers. Microaggressions in the workplace, which, along with other offerings, will help create a culture where employees feel valued and are encouraged to be their true selves, celebrating each individual's uniqueness. The pitch claims that this training enables talent acquisition, retention, and career advancement. It is not inappropriate to use an unemployed black man's murder by police to justify expenditures on reducing unintentional microaggressions at work so the bosses can retain more talent. I misread the beginning. It says, is it not inappropriate? Is it not inappropriate? And I think most people would say, yeah, it is inappropriate. Of course, setting aside unseemly invocations of Floyd's name, an initiative needn't be a coherent response to his death to be defensible or worthwhile. All companies should invest in being equal opportunity employers, including affirmative steps to ensure, for example, that managers haven't unwittingly introduced unjust pay disparities or culturally biased dress codes. I like how the author of this article keeps using equal opportunity, so it kind of positions him as like not quite pushing DEI. Beyond that, if DEI consultants made life better for marginalized groups or people of color or any other identifiable cohort within a given corporation or organization, or boosted corporate profits so that their fees paid for themselves, the industry could be justified on different terms. But most DEI consulting fails those tests. Harvard Business Review published an article in 2012 called "Diversity Training Doesn't Work," which drew heavily on research published in 2007 by the sociologist Frank Dobbin, Alexandra Kalev, and Erin Kelly. A study of 829 companies over 31 years showed that diversity training had no positive effects in the average workplace, the article reported. Millions of dollars a year were spent on the training, resulting in, well, nothing. In 2018, Dobbin and Kalev wrote that hundreds of studies dating back to the 1930s suggest that anti-bias training does not reduce bias, alter behavior, or change the workplace. When we first started looking into Bridge, a lot of the articles coming out would quote these studies from years ago that said that diversity training didn't help anything, and that the reason that it didn't help anything was because it was merely people checking a box and not caring about the work. And there were articles that said that most companies are 20 plus years behind on fixing racial justice. They are 20 plus years behind on fixing wage disparity. So instead of looking at this and being like, wow, are we the bad guys? They looked at it and said, how can we use this to further our agenda that we're currently trying to push? Portending the 2020 explosion of DEI, they continued, we have been speaking to employers about this research for more than a decade, with the message that diversity training is likely the most expensive and least effective diversity program around. But they persist, worried about the optics of getting rid of training, concerned about litigation, unwilling to take more difficult but consequential steps, or simply in the thrall of glossy training materials and their purveyors. And no wonder the DEI consultants struggle to be effective. In a 2021 article in the Annual Review of Psychology, a team of scholars concluded that the underlying research on how to intervene to reduce prejudice is itself flawed and underwhelming, while regularly oversold. And we also already knew this as well. We've talked about the McKinsey study. A paper published in the 2022 Annual Review of Psychology concluded, in examining hundreds of articles on the topic, we discovered that the literature is amorphous and complex and does not allow us to reach decisive conclusions regarding best practices in diversity training. The authors continued, we suggest that the enthusiasm for and monetary investment in diversity training has outpaced the available evidence that such programs are effective in achieving their goals. Those outside the industry are hardly alone in levying harsh critiques. Many industry insiders are scathing as well. Last year in Harvard Business Review, Lily Zhang, a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategist, consultant, and speaker, posited that the DEI industrial complex has a big, poorly kept secret. The actual efficacy of most trainings and interventions is lower than many practitioners make it out to be. In Zhang's telling, the industry's problems flow in large part from the extreme lack of standards, consistency, and accountability among DEI practitioners. Zhang was even more blunt in comments to New York in 2021. When your clients are these companies that are desperate to do anything and don't quite understand how this works, ineffective DEI work can be lucrative. And we're seeing cynicism pop up as a result. That DEI is just a shitty way in which companies burn money. And I'm like, yeah, it can be. What if instead of burning the money, we simply redirected it to the poor? Yes, I understand that it isn't as if that money would have gone to the neediest among us, but for the DEI initiatives of the past few years, still, I am being serious when I propose the alternative. I should note that The Atlantic, like many other media companies, holds DEI training for new hires. These trainings include discussions of Okun's critique of sense of urgency and an updated version of the equity/equality cartoon. And basically, Zhang is calling out people here. Zhang is saying, I'm doing the work correctly. I'm not just flinging myself and collecting $15,000 checks to do speeches. I'm actually doing the work to transform change that I want to see. I'm not like these ones that Zhang would probably call grifters, who are just trying to sell speeches and get easy paydays while not actually committing to doing the work necessary to bring about the cultural change that they want. The DEI spending of 2020 and 2021 was a signal sent from executives to workers that the bosses are good people who value DEI. A signal executives sent because many workers valued it. Put another way, the outlays were symbolic. At best, they symbolized something like, we care and we're willing to spend money to prove it. But don't results matter more than the intention? A more jaded appraisal is that many kinds of DEI spending symbolize not a real commitment to diversity or inclusion, let alone equity, but rather the instinctive talent that college-educated Americans have for directing resources to our class in ways that make us feel good. In that telling, the DEI consulting industry is social justice progressivism's analog to trickle-down economics. Unrigorous trainings are held, mostly for college graduates with full-time jobs and health insurance, as if by changing us, the marginalized will somehow benefit. But in fact, the poor, or the marginalized, or people of color, or descendants of slaves, would benefit far more from a fraction of the DEI industry's profits. It would be too sweeping to say that no DEI consultant should ever get hired. Underneath the jargony umbrella is a subset of valuable professionals who have expertise in things like improving hiring procedures, boosting retention, resolving conflict, facilitating hard conversations after a lawsuit, processing a traumatic event, or assessing and fixing an actually discriminatory workplace. In an ideal circumstance, a company might need one or more of those skills. Ideally, a larger organization develops human resource teams with all of those skills. But the reflective hiring of DEI consultants with dubious expertise and hazy methods is like setting money on fire in a nation where too many people are struggling just to get by. The professional class should feel good about having done something for social justice, not after conducting or attending a DEI session, but after giving money to poor people. And to any CEO eager to show social justice-minded employees that he or she cares, I urge this. Before hiring a DEI consultant, calculate the cost and let workers vote on whether that money should go to the DEI consultant or be given to the poor. Presented with that choice, I bet most workers would make the equitable decision. Oh, man. The economics is the new trickle. Yeah, I know. As you know, ironic choice of words for silly people. Very ironic choice of words for very silly people.